Welcome to a spine-chilling journey through some of the most unsettling, true, scary stories you'll ever hear. Tonight we delve into the eerie, the unexplained, and the downright terrifying. So sit back, perhaps with a warm drink to steady your nerves, and prepare yourself for a descent into the unknown. In a small rundown motel on the outskirts of town, room 104 has gained a notorious reputation. Guests who have stayed there report strange occurrences that defy logical explanation. One guest, a travelling salesman named Mark, checked into room 104 late one night. Exhausted from his journey, he fell asleep quickly, only to be awakened by the sound of whispering voices. At first he thought it was coming from the hallway, but as he strained to listen, he realized it was coming from inside his room. Mark turned on the light and saw nothing out of the ordinary, but as he lay back down, he felt a sudden pressure on his chest, like someone was sitting on him. He struggled to breathe and could barely move. In a panic, he reached for the lamp and turned it on. The pressure immediately lifted, and he was alone once more. The next morning, Mark checked out early, visibly shaken. He told the motel manager about his experience, who simply nodded knowingly. Room 104 has a history. Since then, guests have reported similar experiences. In the vast wilderness of a national park, where nature's beauty meets its untamed wildness, a seasoned hiker named David set out on what was supposed to be a routine trek, a journey he had undertaken many times before. He was well prepared, experienced, and had hiked this trail numerous times before, always returning with stories of adventure. But when he didn't return as scheduled, a search party was quickly organized, fearing the worst. They found his campsite. But David was nowhere to be seen, his belongings eerily untouched. The only clue was a cryptic note left inside his tent, a message that sent chills down their spines. It read, "They're watching me. I can't escape." The words were hastily scrawled, filled with a sense of urgency and fear. The search party combed the area, but the deeper they went into the forest, the stranger things became, as if the forest itself was hiding secrets. They found footprints that abruptly stopped, as if David had vanished into thin air, leaving no trace behind. As night fell, the search team set up camp and planned to resume their efforts at first light, hoping for a breakthrough. But as they sat around the fire, they began to hear eerie sounds that seemed to come from the very heart of the forest. Whispers carried by the wind, voices that seemed to speak in a language unknown, twigs snapping in the darkness as if someone or something was moving just beyond their sight, and a distant mournful wail that echoed through the trees, sending shivers down their spines. Some of the team members reported seeing shadowy figures moving among the trees, always just out of sight, adding to the growing sense of dread. The next morning they found more disturbing clues, signs that something unnatural was at play. David's backpack hanging from a tree, its contents strewn about, as if it had been ransacked in a hurry, and claw marks on the bark, as if something had tried to climb it, leaving deep gouges in the wood. The sense of being watched grew stronger, and some team members began to feel an overwhelming urge to leave, their nerves fraying. Despite their increasing fear, they pressed on, driven by the hope of finding David and uncovering the truth. They discovered an old, overgrown trail that led to a hidden cave, a place that seemed untouched by time. Inside they found evidence of a struggle, signs that David had fought against something or someone. Torn clothing, bloodstains, and David's broken watch, each piece telling a story of desperation. His disappearance remains unsolved, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk in the wilderness and the mysteries that may never be uncovered. It began as an ordinary evening for Emily, a widow still grieving the loss of her husband John. The sun had just set, casting a warm glow over the suburban neighborhood. Emily, lost in her thoughts, was in the kitchen preparing dinner when the phone rang. She was in the kitchen preparing dinner when the phone rang. The sound startled her, pulling her out of her reverie. She wiped her hands on a towel and walked over to the counter, her heart beating a little faster. She answered it, expecting a telemarketer or wrong number, but what she heard on the other end froze her in place. The voice was eerily familiar, sending chills down her spine. "Emily, it's me," said a voice that sounded exactly like John. Her breath caught in her throat, and she felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. At first she thought it was a cruel prank, but the voice continued, mentioning details only John would know. Memories they shared, secrets only the two of them held. It was impossible for anyone else to know these things. Memories they shared. Secrets only the two of them held. She felt a mix of emotions, fear, confusion, and a strange sense of hope. Could it really be John? Emily hung up her heart, pounding, and tried to convince herself it was just her mind playing tricks. But the calls continued over the next few days, each one more unsettling than the last. The calls continued over the next few days, each one more unsettling than the last. The voice on the other end was undeniably John's, and he spoke of things that had happened after his death. Emily's skepticism turned to fear as she realized that whoever or whatever was calling her knew too much. The voice on the other end was undeniably John's, and he spoke of things that had happened after his death. Emily's skepticism turned to fear as she realized that whoever or whatever was calling her knew too much. She felt trapped in a nightmare, unable to escape the haunting voice. Emily's skepticism turned to fear as she realized that whoever or whatever was calling her knew too much. She confided in her best friend Sarah, who suggested they record the calls. Sarah was skeptical but supportive, wanting to help Emily find some peace. She confided in her best friend Sarah, who suggested they record the calls. The next time the phone rang, Emily was ready. She pressed the record button and listened as the voice spoke again, this time warning her of danger. The next time the phone rang, Emily was ready. She pressed the record button and listened as the voice spoke again, this time warning her of danger. "They're coming for you, Emily. You need to leave." She pressed the record button and listened as the voice spoke again, this time warning her of danger. "They're coming for you, Emily. You need to leave." The urgency in the voice was unmistakable, and it sent a shiver down her spine. "They're coming for you, Emily. You need to leave." Emily and Sarah took the recording to a paranormal investigator who confirmed that the voice was an exact match for John's. The investigator believed that John's spirit was trying to protect Emily from something sinister. Emily and Sarah took the recording to a paranormal investigator who confirmed that the voice was an exact match for John's. The investigator believed that John's spirit was trying to protect Emily from something sinister. They decided to conduct a séance to try and communicate with him directly. The investigator believed that John's spirit was trying to protect Emily from something sinister. They decided to conduct a séance to try and communicate with him directly. During the séance, the room grew cold and the candles flickered. They decided to conduct a séance to try and communicate with him directly. During the séance, the room grew cold and the candles flickered. The atmosphere was tense, and everyone held their breath as they waited for a sign. During the séance, the room grew cold and the candles flickered. The investigator asked if John was present, and the planchette on the Ouija board moved to yes. Emily felt a mix of relief and fear, knowing that John's spirit was indeed with them. The investigator asked if John was present, and the planchette on the Ouija board moved to yes. Emily felt a mix of relief and fear, knowing that John's spirit was indeed with them. The séance continued, and they hoped to uncover the truth behind the mysterious calls. When the Johnson family moved into their new home, they were excited to start fresh. The house was everything they had dreamed of, a perfect place to create new memories and build their future. The house was spacious, with a large backyard and a basement perfect for storage. It seemed like the ideal home for their growing family, a place where they could finally settle down. But it wasn't long before they began to notice strange things happening in the basement. The once inviting space started to feel ominous and unwelcoming. It started with cold spots and the feeling of being watched. The air would turn icy cold in certain areas, sending shivers down their spines. Mrs. Johnson first noticed it while doing laundry. She would often feel a sudden chill, as if someone or something was standing right behind her. She felt a chill and turned to see a shadowy figure standing in the corner. The figure was dark and indistinct, but its presence was unmistakable. She blinked and it was gone. The shadow had vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving her questioning her own senses. She brushed it off as her imagination, but the feeling persisted. No matter how hard she tried to ignore it, the sense of unease lingered. One evening, Mr. Johnson went down to the basement to retrieve some tools. He had heard his wife's stories, but remained skeptical. As he rummaged through the boxes, he heard a faint whispering. The sound was barely audible, like a distant voice carried on the wind. He called out, thinking it was one of the kids playing a prank, but there was no response. The basement remained eerily silent. The whispering grew louder, and he saw the shadow move across the wall. It was as if the darkness itself had come to life. He quickly grabbed the tools and hurried upstairs. His heart pounded in his chest, and he couldn't shake the feeling of dread. The children also began to experience strange occurrences. They would hear footsteps when no one was there, and see the shadow at the bottom of the stairs. They would hear footsteps when no one was there, and see the shadow at the bottom of the stairs. The once playful basement had become a place of fear. One night their youngest daughter, Lily, woke up screaming, saying the shadow had been in her room. Her cries echoed through the house, filling everyone with terror. The family decided to call a priest to bless the house. They hoped that a spiritual intervention might rid them of the malevolent presence. During the blessing, the priest felt an overwhelming sense of dread in the basement. His usually calm demeanor was replaced with visible concern. He sprinkled holy water and recited prayers, but the shadows seemed to grow stronger. The darkness seemed to resist his efforts, almost mocking him. The priest advised the Johnsons to avoid the basement and consider moving. He warned them that the entity was powerful and not easily banished. Determined to uncover the truth, Mr. Johnson did some research and discovered that the previous owner had been involved in occult practices. The history of the house was darker than they had imagined. He found an old dusty book hidden in the basement, filled with dark rituals and summoning spells. The book's contents were disturbing and sinister. It became clear that the shadow was a manifestation of those dark practices. The malevolent force had been conjured and left to haunt the house. The family decided to move out, but not before one final encounter. As they packed their belongings, the shadow loomed larger than ever, a final reminder of the darkness they were leaving behind. The doll was a gift given to little Emma by her grandmother. It was an antique, with delicate porcelain skin and a beautiful dress. Emma adored it and named it Annabelle. But from the moment the doll entered their home, strange things began to happen. Emma's parents first noticed the doll would move on its own. They would find it in different rooms, even though Emma swore she hadn't touched it. At night they would hear soft giggling and the sound of tiny footsteps. Emma started having nightmares and would wake up screaming, saying Annabelle was trying to hurt her. The family decided to lock the doll in the attic, hoping that would put an end to the disturbances. But the activity only grew worse. The attic door would creak open on its own, and the doll would be found sitting at the top of the stairs as if it had escaped. Desperate for answers, they contacted a paranormal expert who had dealt with cursed objects before. The expert examined the doll and confirmed that it was indeed cursed. He explained that the doll had a dark history, having belonged to a girl who had died under mysterious circumstances. Her spirit was believed to be trapped inside the doll, seeking revenge. The expert performed a cleansing ritual, but the doll's malevolent presence was too strong. He advised the family to get rid of it, but warned that simply throwing it away wouldn't work. The doll needed to be destroyed in a specific way to break the curse. Thank you for joining us on this terrifying journey. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the bell icon for more spine-tingling tales. Your support helps us continue to bring you the most unsettling, true, scary stories from around the world. Stay safe and always be aware of the unseen forces that might be lurking just out of sight. Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked. The house stood alone, a solitary figure against the backdrop of a darkening sky. Its silhouette was stark and foreboding, a testament to years of neglect and the passage of time. The once grand structure now lay in ruins, its walls crumbling and its roof sagging under the weight of countless seasons. The air around it was thick with the scent of decay, a reminder of the life that once thrived within its now desolate halls, a sentinel of secrets shrouded in ivy and shadowed by towering oaks. The ivy clung to the walls like a second skin, its tendrils weaving a tapestry of green that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The oaks, ancient and gnarled, stood as silent guardians, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers to touch the house's weathered facade. It was as if the very trees were trying to reclaim the house, to pull it back into the embrace of the forest from which it had sprung. Its windows, like vacant eyes, stared out at the world with an unsettling emptiness. The glass, cracked and clouded with age, reflected the dying light of the day, casting eerie shadows that danced across the overgrown lawn. Each window seemed to hold a story, a fragment of the past trapped behind the panes, waiting to be uncovered. The silence was palpable, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of a bird. I felt it the moment I stepped onto the porch, a coldness that seeped from the stone, a weight that settled in the air. The boards beneath my feet groaned in protest, their once sturdy planks now weakened by years of exposure to the elements. The porch, with its peeling paint and sagging roof, seemed to sag under the weight of its own history. It was a place where time stood still, where the past and present collided in a haunting dance. This was no ordinary place. The air inside was thick with the scent of mildew and rot, a testament to the years of neglect that had taken their toll on the once grand interior. The walls, once adorned with elegant wallpaper, were now peeling and discoloured, their patterns barely visible beneath layers of grime. The floor, covered in a thick layer of dust, creaked with every step as if the house itself was protesting my presence. This was a house haunted, not just by the spirits of those who had once lived within its walls, but by the memories and emotions that had been imprinted on its very fabric. Every corner seemed to hold a whisper, every shadow a secret. The air was charged with an energy that was both unsettling and captivating, drawing me deeper into the heart of the house. The hallway was the worst. It stretched out before me like a dark tunnel, its walls closing in on either side. The floorboards beneath my feet creaked with every step, their groans echoing through the narrow space. The air was thick with dust, and the faint light from the windows barely penetrated the gloom. It was a place where the past seemed to linger, where the shadows held secrets that were best left undisturbed. Long and narrow, it stretched into the darkness at the heart of the house. The walls were lined with old photographs, their frames tarnished, and their images faded with age. Each picture seemed to tell a story, a glimpse into the lives of those who had once called this place home. The faces stared out at me, their eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and longing, as if they were trapped within the confines of the house, unable to move on. Floorboards creaked underfoot, each step a groan of protest from the weary timbers. The sound echoed through the empty halls, a reminder of the house's age and the countless footsteps that had once traversed its floors. The wood, worn and weathered, seemed to hold the weight of the past, each creak a testament to the passage of time. Dust motes danced in the faint light that filtered through the grimy window at the far end. The light, weak and pale, barely illuminated the room, casting long shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. The dust, disturbed by my presence, swirled in the air like tiny spectres, their movements almost hypnotic. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, where the past and present coexisted in a delicate balance. It was a place where shadows lingered, where whispers seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The air was thick with an unseen presence, a feeling of being watched that sent shivers down my spine. The walls, covered in peeling wallpaper, seemed to close in around me, their whispers growing louder with each step. It was as if the house itself was alive, its very structure infused with the memories and emotions of those who had once lived within its walls. Every night, a chill settled over the house as the clock chimed 12. The sound echoed through the empty halls, a haunting reminder of the passage of time. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper, as if the house itself was preparing for the arrival of something unseen. It was a time when the past seemed to come alive, when the spirits of those who had once lived within its walls roamed freely. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy. It was a feeling that was both exhilarating and terrifying, a sense of anticipation that hung in the air like a storm about to break. The house seemed to come alive, its very walls pulsing with a life of their own. It was a place where the past and present collided, where the boundaries between the living and the dead were blurred. It was then, in the dead of night, that the shadow appeared, a fleeting glimpse at the edge of my vision, a darkness that seemed to coalesce from the shadows themselves. It moved with a grace that was both eerie and mesmerizing, its form shifting and changing as it moved through the house. It was a presence that was both familiar and alien, a reminder of the house's haunted past. A fleeting glimpse at the edge of my vision, a darkness that seemed to coalesce from the shadows themselves. It moved with a grace that was both eerie and mesmerizing, its form shifting and changing as it moved through the house. It was a presence that was both familiar and alien, a reminder of the house's haunted past. It was always there, watching, waiting, a silent sentinel that seemed to be a part of the house itself. Its presence was both comforting and unsettling, a reminder of the house's history and the lives that had once been lived within its walls. It was a place where the past and present coexisted, where the boundaries between the living and the dead were blurred. The house on Harbinger Lane was more than just a building. It was a living, breathing entity, a testament to the passage of time and the memories that lingered within its walls. Sleep was impossible in that house. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, a silence that seemed to amplify every tiny sound. The walls, old and worn, seemed to whisper secrets of the past, secrets that were better left forgotten. Each night as the clock struck midnight, the house would come alive with a symphony of eerie noises that played on my nerves. Every creak of the floorboards, a reminder of the countless footsteps that had once echoed through these halls, sent shivers down my spine. The wood, aged and brittle, groaned under the weight of memories long past. Every rustle of leaves against the window pane, a ghostly caress from the outside world, sent a jolt of fear through me. The wind, howling like a lost soul, seemed to be trying to communicate with the spirits that resided within the house. But it was the shadow that haunted my waking hours, a dark, ominous presence that seemed to lurk just beyond the edge of my vision, always watching, always waiting. It was as if the house itself was alive, and the shadow was its soul, a spectre of the past that refused to be forgotten. Its presence was a constant weight on my chest, a reminder that I was not alone. No matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise, the feeling of being watched was inescapable. The shadow was always there, a silent observer of my every move. It always appeared in the same spot. At the end of the hallway, where the darkness seemed to gather and thicken as if drawn to that particular place. It was a spot that I avoided during the day, but at night it was impossible to ignore. At the end of the hallway, just beyond the reach of the single flickering bulb, the light, weak and unreliable, cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to come alive in the darkness. It was in this half-light that the shadow would appear, a tall, slender silhouette that defied explanation. A tall, slender silhouette, its edges blurred and indistinct. It was as if the shadow was not entirely of this world, a being caught between the realms of the living and the dead. Its presence was both terrifying and mesmerizing, a dark enigma that I could not unravel. I told myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the light, but deep down I knew better. The shadow was real, a manifestation of the house's dark history, a spectre that had been waiting for someone to notice it. But deep down I knew better. The fear that gripped me was too real, too visceral to be dismissed as mere imagination. The shadow was a part of the house, a part of me, and there was no escaping it. One night I woke with a start. The air was thick with tension, and the silence was deafening. My heart pounded in my chest as I lay there, trying to make sense of the darkness that surrounded me. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed twice, the witching hour. The sound, deep and resonant, seemed to echo through the house, a reminder of the passage of time and the inevitability of the night. My heart pounded in my chest as I lay there, listening to the silence of the house. Every creak, every rustle seemed amplified, a symphony of fear that played on my nerves. I knew that the shadow was near, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And then I saw it, the shadow. It was more defined than ever before, its edges sharp and clear. It moved with a purpose, a dark intent that sent chills down my spine. But this time it was different. It was moving. Slowly, deliberately it advanced down the hallway, its form shifting and changing as it approached. I could feel its malevolent presence, a dark force that seemed to draw the very life from the air around it. I pulled the covers over my head, hoping to block out the sight of the shadow. But even in the darkness I could feel its presence, a cold, oppressive force that seemed to seep into my very soul. My body trembled with fear, my mind racing with thoughts of what the shadow might do. I knew that I had to face it, to confront the darkness that had taken hold of my life, but the fear was too great, too overwhelming. Summoning all my courage, I slowly lowered the covers and looked down the hallway. The shadow was still there, its form more solid and menacing than ever. It seemed to be waiting for me, daring me to take the first step. With a deep breath, I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up. The floorboards creaked under my weight, a familiar sound that seemed to ground me in reality. I took a tentative step forward, my heart pounding in my chest. As I walked down the hallway, the shadow seemed to grow larger, more imposing. But with each step, my fear began to ebb, replaced by a sense of determination. I knew that I had to face the shadow, to confront the darkness that had haunted me for so long. When I finally reached the end of the hallway, I reached out towards the shadow. My hand trembled, but I forced myself to keep going. As my fingers brushed against the darkness, a strange sensation washed over me, a mix of fear and relief. The shadow began to dissipate, its form melting away into the darkness. I felt a weight lift from my chest, a sense of liberation that I'd not felt in years. The house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as the shadow vanished. As I stood there in the now peaceful hallway, I realized that the shadow had been a manifestation of my own fears, a dark reflection of the past that I had been unable to let go. By facing it, I had freed myself from its grip, and the house, once a place of terror, had become a place of peace. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly at first, a slight swaying motion, like reeds bending in the wind. The curtains in my room would flutter ever so gently, even when the windows were closed. It was as if an unseen force was brushing past them, whispering secrets that I couldn't quite hear. Then it began to glide towards me. At first it was just a shadow, a trick of the light, I told myself, but as the nights wore on, the shadow grew bolder, more defined. It moved with a purpose, a silent predator stalking its prey. Slowly at first, then with increasing speed. Each night it would come a little closer, its movements more deliberate. I could feel its eyes on me, though I couldn't see them. The sensation was unnerving, like being watched by something that shouldn't exist. Terror froze me in place. My body refused to move, paralyzed by an overwhelming sense of dread. I wanted to run, to hide, but my legs felt like lead. My mind screamed at me to do something, anything, but I was trapped in my own fear. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, my throat constricted and my lungs burned for air. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls pressing in, suffocating me. I was a prisoner in my own home, held captive by an entity I couldn't see or understand. All I could do was watch as the shadow approached. It moved with a fluid grace, almost hypnotic in its motion. I was drawn to it, unable to look away, even as every instinct screamed at me to flee. The closer it came, the colder the room grew. It stopped just short of my bedroom door. For a moment it lingered there, as if deciding whether to enter. The air was thick with tension, every second stretching into an eternity. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it halted, as if some invisible barrier held it back. The air grew colder. The shadows in the room seemed to deepen. It was as if the darkness itself was alive, pulsing with a malevolent energy. The temperature dropped, and I could see my breath misting in the air. The room was no longer just dark, it was oppressive, suffocating. I could feel its presence now, a palpable weight that pressed down on me, stealing my breath. It was more than just a shadow, it was a force, an entity with a will of its own. The pressure was almost physical, like an invisible hand pressing down on my chest. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the shadow receded, melting back into the darkness at the end of the hall. It was as if it had never been there, leaving me to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing, but the lingering chill in the air and the pounding of my heart told me otherwise. I lay awake for the rest of the night, my heart pounding in my chest. Morning brought little relief. The sunlight seemed harsh and unforgiving, casting stark shadows that reminded me of the night's events. I was exhausted, but sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind set my nerves on edge. The memory of the moving shadow clung to me, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurked within the walls of the old house. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the shadow was still there, lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to return. I knew then that I couldn't ignore it any longer. This was no mere figment of my imagination. Something was in the house with me, something that defied explanation. I had to confront it to understand what it was and why it had chosen me. I had to find out what it was, what it wanted. Armed with a flashlight and a newfound determination, I began my search. Every corner of the house held potential secrets, every shadow a possible hiding place. I was no longer just a victim, I was a seeker of truth, determined to uncover the mystery that had invaded my life.